I gripped the steering wheel tightly as my old sedan rumbled over the gravel road, leaving a cloud of dust behind me. The worn GPS on the dashboard showed that I was approaching my destination, Pineville. This would be my new home, at least for the summer. My great-uncle Thomas had left me a cabin here, and I was eager, well, as eager as one can be, to escape city life for a while. Pineville was bathed in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, an idyllic contrast to the towering cityscapes I was accustomed to. But as I drove past the welcome sign, a faded wooden piece that looked like it had seen better days, I felt a subtle shift in the air. It was as if the sunbeams were struggling to pierce a veiled mist that wasn't visible to the eye. My first stop was Henderson's Grocery, the store owned by Sarah's family. Sarah and I had been friends as kids, but we had lost touch over the years. "Hey, Carter! Long time no see!" Sarah greeted me with a warm smile as I walked in. Her eyes, however, seemed to carry a trace of unease. "It's just my imagination," I told myself. We caught up briefly, and though Sarah was as friendly as ever, she skillfully navigated around any mention of the cabin, of the old Henderson place, as the locals referred to it. Next, I had to fix a clunky sound my car was making. At Smith's Auto Repair, I met Jack, a burly man with a graying beard and calloused hands. He fixed the car and chatted casually, but the moment I mentioned where I was staying, his demeanor altered. "Ah, the old Henderson place," he said, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "Don't get much company there. You take care now." The day was nearing its end, but before I could retreat to my cabin, I had one more chance encounter. At the edge of town, near the now-closed post office, stood Henry. He was an elderly man with a cane, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, each telling its own silent story. "Don't open the shed after dark. Ah," he whispered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the musty scent of age and tobacco on his breath. "What did you say?" I asked, taken aback by the sudden seriousness in his tone. "You heard me," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Just remember it." The warning echoed in my mind as I finally made it to the cabin. It was quaint, surrounded by towering pine trees and overlooking a small, serene lake. As I took it all in, my gaze fell upon the shed, about 20 yards from the cabin. It was a decrepit structure, its wooden panels warped and discolored. A strange feeling gripped me, a sudden sensation of vertigo, like standing at the edge of a high cliff. My eyes met the padlocked doors of the shed, and an inexplicable wave of dread washed over me. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to Henry's unsettling words. "Don't be ridiculous," I scoffed inwardly, forcing myself to head inside the cabin. Yet the dread lingered, sticking to me like a second skin. After unpacking, I found a dusty leather-bound journal on a creaky bookshelf. It belonged to Great-Uncle Thomas. Flipping through its pages, the last entry caught my eye. "Heard it again in the shed. It's getting louder. I don't know how much longer I can ignore it." My hands trembled as I closed the journal, placing it back on the bookshelf as if it were a volatile chemical compound. I decided I needed some fresh air to clear my mind and erase the inky foreboding that had begun to stain my thoughts. I stepped outside, into the encroaching twilight. The sky was a deepening shade of blue, and the first stars of the night had begun their celestial dance. Yet, even their twinkling seemed subdued, as if dimmed by an invisible pall. I walked towards the lake, its calm surface reflecting the indigo sky like a somber mirror. Nature's serenity should have soothed me. Instead, it felt as if the very earth, sky, and water were holding their breath, waiting for something, or someone, to shatter the silence. As I stood there, I felt a faint breeze slide past me. It carried with it a mix of earthly scents, pine, damp soil, and something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. It was a metallic, burnt aroma, so subtle yet unnervingly out of place. What is that smell? I thought, as my heart rate began to quicken inexplicably. I forced myself to breathe deeply, hoping to dispel the unease that had settled into the pit of my stomach. As I turned back towards the cabin, my eyes once again landed on the shed. In the fading light, it looked even more sinister, its form almost blending into the encroaching darkness. It was as if the shed was absorbing the twilight, becoming a part of the night itself. Enough, I mentally scolded myself, feeling ridiculous for allowing a simple structure to disquiet me so. But as I headed back inside, a haunting growl broke the stillness of the night. It echoed, low and guttural, and I couldn't deny its direction. It was coming from the shed. Sleep eluded me that first night. My mind raced with what-ifs and whys, looping endlessly through the disquieting experiences of the day. By the time dawn's first light broke, I felt as though I had barely closed my eyes. I could have blamed it on the unfamiliar setting, but deep down, I knew it was the shed that had infringed upon my slumber. Rising from bed, I shrugged on some clothes and made coffee. As I sipped the warm brew, I pondered whether to confront the elephant, or in this case, the dilapidated shed, in the room. You're being irrational, I told myself, but the metallic growl from last night reverberated in my memory, drowning out my internal voice of reason. I decided to spend the morning exploring the property, stalling for time before confronting the unsettling enigma of the shed. The surrounding forest was dense, its floor blanketed in decaying leaves and tufts of moss. I heard the chatter of birds and squirrels, sounds that in another context would be soothing, but today they seemed like fleeting distractions. By afternoon, my sense of discomfort reached an apex. It was exacerbated by the growing shadows that the setting sun cast, as though the forest was slowly being swallowed by an unseen entity. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. When I found an old photograph half buried under the pine needles, I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a picture of my great-uncle Thomas standing in front of the very cabin I now inhabited. He was smiling, but his eyes bore a haunting emptiness. He was holding a key in his hand, a key that looked eerily similar to the one I had found inside the cabin, labeled Shed. Am I just filling in the blanks of a narrative I've concocted? But no, the key existed, as tangible as my growing apprehension. I returned to the cabin, my resolve fortified. My curiosity had evolved into a pressing need for answers. I grabbed the key from the kitchen drawer, its cold metal seeming to bite into my skin, and walked toward the shed. But the padlock surrendered easily, almost as though it was eager to relinquish its duty. I slid the doors open and peered inside. To my initial relief, the shed contained nothing more than old tools, some fishing gear, and stacks of yellowing newspapers. Just as I was about to dismiss my concerns as figments of an overactive imagination, something caught my eye. In the corner of the shed was a small trapdoor, almost entirely concealed by an old tarp. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment, I considered walking away, leaving this Pandora's box unopened. But then, the growl from the previous night filled my ears again, this time as a memory, but just as vivid. I pulled away the tarp, revealing a rusted iron ring affixed to the trapdoor. I gripped it and lifted. And as the trapdoor creaked open, an unnatural chill emanated from below, along with a scent that turned my stomach, a grotesque blend of rotting meat and sulfur. But what shook me to my core was the sound that followed, a guttural, almost mocking laughter that crawled its way up from the dark abyss, wrapping itself around my soul. What have I done? The laughter from the abyss beneath the trapdoor was an audible nightmare, a sound that violated the laws of both nature and sanity. I slammed the trapdoor shut, my trembling hands barely able to grip the rusted iron ring. The padlock was hastily re-engaged, its click sounding louder than it had any right to be. I retreated to the cabin, my body awash in cold sweat. What have I unleashed? The question looped in my mind like a broken record. As much as I wanted to flee, I couldn't ignore the growing compulsion to understand the abomination beneath the shed. I decided to consult the journal of my great-uncle Thomas once again, as if hoping the dead could lend some insight into the incomprehensible. I found another entry dated a few weeks after the last. It's been 2 weeks. Every night, the sounds grow louder. Scratching, pounding, howls of a timber that no earthly creature could produce. I have seen its eyes. They're a violent shade of violet, with pupils that seem to spiral into an endless void. The creature craves something. It desires to be known. Or perhaps to make its nightmares our own. My eyes widened as I read the description. The sense of dread returned, its intensity multiplied tenfold. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting its farewell in a dance of orange and red across the sky. Night was upon me, and I couldn't shake the fear that darkness would bring forth more than just the absence of light. And then it happened. The cabin lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced upon the walls like grotesque marionettes. A sharp crackle came from the old radio in the corner of the room, followed by bursts of static interspersed with what sounded like distorted whispers. I strained my ears, my rational mind still clinging to the idea that it could just be interference, but the syllables that cut through the static were undeniably articulate. Know me. A high-pitched shriek reverberated through the cabin, as if responding to the radio's malevolent call. I rushed to the window and peered into the darkness. I saw them then. Those violent, violet eyes, their pupils spiraling into an obsidian abyss, floating at the edge of the forest, swaying as if detached from any corporeal form. It was the creature. My gut wrenched in terror, but its eyes held me captive, pulling me into their spiral as I felt my thoughts blur and merge with fragments of alien memories, images of sprawling galaxies, cosmic desolation, and unspeakable rites performed at the altars of forgotten gods. With every ounce of willpower, I managed to break the ocular lock. I stumbled back, gasping for air, my mind struggling to process the eldritch knowledge that had been momentarily thrust upon me. The creature, the entity, it was ancient, malevolent, and yearning to breach the confines of its subterranean prison. This can't be real. It's too fantastical, too utterly insane. But the pounding reality was inescapable. It was as real as the fear that clenched my heart, as tangible as the darkness that enveloped the world outside. And I knew then, with chilling clarity, that ignoring the entity was no longer an option. The boundaries of my understanding had been stretched, torn, and finally shattered. As I stood in the cabin, the weight of the revelation bore down on me, an omnipresent cloud of impending doom. I knew there was only one path forward. I had to confront the entity, face the source of the inexplicable horrors that had been unleashed. With grim resolve, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the shed. Every step felt like a mile, each crunch of the gravel beneath my feet echoing like an ominous drum roll. When I reached the padlock, I found it already undone, hanging open as if in invitation. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the trapdoor's iron ring. This is insanity. But there's no turning back now. I pulled it open, the hinges groaning in agony, and shined my flashlight into the void below. Descending the wooden stairs, I felt the temperature drop with each step, as if I were moving away from the realm of the living and into something else. When I reached the bottom, my flashlight beam fell upon an ancient, dark chamber, its walls etched with runes that seemed to writhe and shift like living things. In the center of the room was a stone altar, and upon it lay a book, an ancient grimoire, bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Beside the book was a chalice filled with a substance that looked like a cross between liquid obsidian and coagulated blood. And then I saw it. The creature. It emerged from the shadowy recesses of the chamber, its form nearly indescribable, a blasphemous blend of humanoid and beast, covered in scales that shimmered with an iridescent sheen. Its eyes were the same violent violet I had seen, but now I could also see its mouth, a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth, arranged in spirals like its hypnotic pupils. "Know me," it whispered, its voice oozing from its form like malignant smoke. "I am the Exul, banished eons ago to this subterranean purgatory. A pact was made, sealed with forbidden rites, to keep me here. But you have set me free." My mind reeled. A pact? Forbidden rites? What had my great-uncle done? "Your bloodline is bound to this covenant," the Exul continued. "You have the choice, Carter. Complete the ritual and join your will with mine. The universe, with all its cosmic splendors and horrors, will be ours to explore." It was a grotesque proposal, an unholy union that promised knowledge and power at the price of an irrevocable loss of humanity. And yet, the temptation gnawed at me, intensified by the Exul's psychic pull. But then I thought of the terror, the malevolence that this creature represented. With a newfound clarity, I realized that some doors are meant to remain closed, some mysteries left unsolved. I aimed my flashlight at the ancient grimoire and the chalice, casting their twisted forms into sharp relief. "I reject your offer," I spat, seizing the book and hurling it into the depths of the abyss from which the Exul had emerged. I followed it with the chalice, its contents spattering into the darkness. The Exul roared, a sound that shook the chamber and reverberated in the very core of my being. "Then you doom us both!" it bellowed. With that, it lunged at me, but not before I could slam the trapdoor shut, sealing the abomination back in its prison. I fled the shed, collapsing when I reached the cabin, my body and mind on the brink of exhaustion. As I looked back at the trapdoor, now just an unassuming feature in the shed's floor, I pondered the irrevocable reality I had uncovered. I had stared into the abyss, into the eye of cosmic malevolence, and had emerged different, marked by an encounter that defied comprehension. The dawn broke, painting the horizon with hues of gold and pink, as if mocking the darkness that had consumed the night. As I packed my belongings, I made a solemn vow never to return to this accursed place, to let the horrors I had unearthed remain buried. I left the key on the kitchen counter, its metal surface now tarnished and corroded as if aged by the malevolent forces it had once held at bay. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those violent violet eyes one last time. But there was nothing, just the receding image of the cabin and the forest swallowing it whole. But then, a thought struck me, a chilling realization that turned my blood to ice. The Exul had called it a covenant, a pact sealed by my bloodline, and I had just broken it.